Imperium Aeternum, the thousand-year saga of Rome. They built a world that was meant to last forever. They built roads that still carry traffic, laws that still govern nations, and an idea of power so profound it has been copied by every empire since. For 12 centuries, Rome was not just a city, it was the gravitational center of Western civilization. It defined ambition, engineered impossible feats, and commanded the loyalty, or the terror, of millions. But the history of Rome is not a single, unbroken line of glory. It is a story of ferocious ambition, corrosive internal conflict, and an ending that was not a sudden catastrophe, but a thousand-year process of slow, internal collapse. To understand the modern world, you must first understand the life, death, and enduring spirit of this city. This is the saga of the rise and fall of the Roman Empire. Forging the Republic, 753 BCE to 44 BCE, the Age of Iron and Law. The myth, the kings, and the birth of freedom. Our story begins not with certainty, but with myth. Legend tells us that in 753 BCE, the city of Rome was founded on the Palatine Hill by Romulus, the survivor of twin brothers suckled by a she-wolf. The moment of its birth was a moment of fratricide, Romulus slaying his brother Remus over the boundaries of the new city. From its very foundation, Rome was infused with violence and defining boundaries. The earliest Roman state was a monarchy, ruled by 7 kings. These were formative years, teaching Rome the discipline of warfare, the necessity of hierarchy, and the art of political absorption. The kings gave Rome the Senate, an advisory council of elders, and the rudiments of the Roman army. But the monarchy proved unstable, culminating in the tyranny of the final ruler, the Etruscan Tarquin the Proud. In 509 BCE, following a scandal involving the violation of the noblewoman Lucretia, the Roman aristocracy, supported by the populace, expelled Tarquin. The Romans, scarred by absolute power, made a solemn vow. Never again would they submit to the rule of a single man. The monarchy was dead. Long live the Republic, res publica, the public thing. The political engine of the Republic. The Roman Republic was the most sophisticated, complex, and resilient political system of the ancient world. It was designed with checks and balances to prevent the return of kingship. At the top stood the 2 annually elected consuls. They held supreme military command, imperium, and governed the city. Below them, the Senate, composed of former magistrates and patrician elders, was the engine of long-term policy, finance, and diplomacy. Though technically an advisory body, the Senate's authority was almost absolute due to tradition and wealth. The voice of the common people resided in the assemblies, where citizens voted on laws and elected magistrates. But this system was not born peaceful, it was forged in centuries of internal class conflict. The struggle between the aristocratic patricians and the common plebeians defined the Republic's first 2 centuries. The plebeians, often the frontline soldiers, demanded rights, initiating the conflict of the orders. They won groundbreaking concessions: the right to appeal arbitrary arrest, the codification of law in the 12 Tables, 450 BCE, and, most critically, the creation of the tribune of the plebs. This official was sacrosanct. A physical assault on a tribune was a religious crime, and held the power of veto, allowing them to strike down acts of the Senate deemed harmful to the common people. This ability to assimilate internal political opposition was Rome's first secret to success. Instead of breaking, the Republic bent, adapted, and grew stronger. The Roman way of war, assimilation. The strength of the Republic was its army. Early Roman expansion across Italy was relentless, driven by a deep-seated fear of external threats and a desire for security. The Roman fighting machine, the legion, evolved from the rigid Greek phalanx into the flexible maniple system. Each maniple, a small, independent block of troops, could maneuver, retreat, or reinforce without breaking the entire line. This tactical flexibility allowed them to defeat the Samnites in the rough Apennine terrain and ultimately dominate the Greek cities of southern Italy. But Rome's true genius lay not in battle, but in assimilation. When Rome defeated a neighboring city, it did not destroy it. It offered a treaty, a path to becoming an ally, soci, or even a path to Roman citizenship. These allies were required to provide troops for Rome's legions, but they governed their own affairs and shared in the spoils of war. This system created an inexhaustible pool of loyal manpower. While Rome's enemies fought with fixed, finite armies, Rome could absorb losses and simply field new legions drawn from its Italian network. This was the resource that made Rome unbeatable. The Century of Terror, the Punic Wars. By the mid-3rd century BCE, Rome had consolidated control over Italy. Its inevitable clash with the other great power of the Western Mediterranean, the Phoenician maritime empire of Carthage, was set. Carthage was a trading juggernaut, a naval power rooted in North Africa. The resulting Punic Wars spanned a century and were a brutal, existential contest for mastery. The First Punic War, 264–241 BCE, forced Rome to become a naval power overnight. Facing superior Carthaginian seamanship, the Romans innovated. They developed the corvus, a hinged boarding bridge, which transformed sea battles into land battles, leveraging the legion's infantry superiority. Rome won, gaining Sicily, Sardinia, and Corsica. But the rivalry was far from over. It exploded again in the Second Punic War, 218–201 BCE, a conflict defined by one man, Hannibal Barca. Vowing eternal hatred for Rome, Hannibal launched one of history's most audacious military campaigns. He marched an army, complete with war elephants, from Spain, over the treacherous Alps, and into Italy. His goal was not to capture Rome, but to break Rome's system of alliances. He achieved tactical perfection at the Battle of Cannae in 216 BCE. Outnumbered, Hannibal executed a textbook double envelopment, allowing his center to retreat while his flanks swung inward, annihilating 80,000 Roman soldiers in a single day. A death toll that shocked the ancient world. The city of Rome was in mourning. Every family had lost a son. Yet, the Senate refused to surrender. They coined a phrase, "Never despair of the Republic." This resilience, coupled with the continued loyalty of most Italian allies, starved Hannibal of the manpower he needed. The tide turned when Rome produced its own genius, Scipio Africanus, who invaded North Africa. Forced to return home, Hannibal was finally defeated by Scipio at the Battle of Zama in 202 BCE. Rome was saved. The Third Punic War, 149–146 BCE, was less a war and more an execution. Rome, driven by the aging Cato the Elder's constant refrain, "Carthago delenda est," Carthage must be destroyed, obliterated the city. Rome was now the undisputed master of the Mediterranean, the Mare Nostrum, RC. The crushing weight of empire. Victory brought unimaginable wealth, new provinces, and millions of slaves. Yet, this very triumph shattered the Republic's foundation. The returning citizen soldiers found their small farms ruined and abandoned. The long years of service meant their land had been neglected or, worse, bought up by wealthy, senatorial elites who used slave labor to create vast, profitable estates called latifundia. The yeoman farmer, the backbone of the Republic, was finished. These landless poor flocked to the city of Rome, forming a volatile, impoverished, and politically susceptible urban mob, the proletariat. The crisis of land and poverty demanded reform. Enter the Gracchi brothers. Tiberius Gracchus, elected tribune of the plebs in 133 BCE, attempted to revive old laws restricting the amount of public land any one individual could hold, redistributing the excess to the poor. The Senate was outraged. When Tiberius sought an unprecedented re-election, a senatorial mob, armed with clubs, beat him and 300 of his followers to death. 10 years later, his brother, Gaius Gracchus, pursued similar reforms and met the same bloody end. The Gracchi assassinations were a seismic moment. They showed that the rule of law could be discarded, and political goals achieved through violence. The sacred office of the tribune was violated. Political murder had replaced peaceful legislation. Warlords and the death of the citizen soldier. The new crisis was military. With no land, the poor had no reason to serve. General Gaius Marius solved this problem by effectively ending the property requirement for service. He created a professional, volunteer army whose soldiers served for pay, plunder, and the promise of land upon retirement, a promise only their commanding general could guarantee. The legion's loyalty shifted from the state to the general. This transformation set the stage for the century of civil war. Generals, warlords, in effect, could now raise private armies utterly devoted to their command. The bitter rivalry between Marius and his protege, Lucius Cornelius Sulla, was the first domino to fall. Sulla, having seized military glory, was passed over by the Senate. He responded by marching his own legions on Rome, an act of sacrilege and treason unprecedented in Republican history. He seized power, declared himself dictator, and executed thousands of opponents in a brutal reign of terror, 82 to 79 BCE. Sulla eventually relinquished power, but the damage was irreversible. The ultimate lesson had been taught. True power in Rome now flowed from the loyalty of the legions, not the decree of the Senate. Caesar and the point of no return. The chaos culminated in the rise of the three men who carved up the state: Pompey Magnus, the great military hero of the East; Marcus Licinius Crassus, the wealthiest man in Rome; and the ambitious politician, Gaius Julius Caesar. They formed the first triumvirate. Caesar, needing military glory to rival Pompey, embarked on the conquest of Gaul, 58 to 50 BCE. This campaign was a military masterpiece, bringing him immense wealth, political fame, and, most importantly, 10 veteran legions hardened by years of brutal warfare. With Crassus killed in Parthia, and the Senate throwing its lot in with Pompey, fearing Caesar's unchecked power, the stage was set for the final confrontation. The Senate ordered Caesar to disband his army and return to Rome as a private citizen. The crucial moment came in 49 BCE. The Rubicon River marked the boundary of Caesar's province. To cross it with his legions was to declare war on the Republic. Caesar, hesitating briefly, famously uttered the phrase, "Alia iacta est," the die is cast. He crossed the river. A civil war ensued, culminating in Caesar's victory over Pompey at the Battle of Pharsalus. Caesar returned to Rome, was made dictator for life, and began ruling as a king in all but name. The surviving Republicans, led by Marcus Junius Brutus and Gaius Cassius Longinus, saw Caesar as the ultimate threat to Roman liberty. On the Ides of March, 44 BCE, they cornered him in the Senate and stabbed him 23 times. They believed they had saved the Republic. Instead, they had merely confirmed its death. They paved the way for another 2 decades of bloody civil war, culminating in the man who would finally end the Republic forever. Marcus Aurelius restored order and held the line, but in doing so, he made a catastrophic final error. He ended the policy of adopting the best successor and named his own son, Commodus, as his heir. The historian Dio Cassius famously wrote, "Our history now descends from a kingdom of gold to one of iron and rust." Commodus, r. 180 to 192 CE, was an unhinged narcissist, obsessed with gladiatorial combat, squandering the treasury, and abandoning all serious administration. His assassination in 192 CE marked the end of the Pax Romana and plunged Rome into the crisis from which it would never fully recover. Marcus Aurelius restored order and held the line, but in doing so, he made a catastrophic final error. He ended the policy of adopting the best successor and named his own son, Commodus, as his heir. The historian Dio Cassius famously wrote, "Our history now descends from a kingdom of gold to one of iron and rust." Commodus, r. 180 to 192 CE, was an unhinged narcissist, obsessed with gladiatorial combat, squandering the treasury, and abandoning all serious administration. His assassination in 192 CE marked the end of the Pax Romana and plunged Rome into the crisis from which it would never fully recover. Decline, division, and fall. 180 CE to 476 CE. The slow unraveling. The crisis of the 3rd century. The 50 years between 235 and 284 CE are known as the crisis of the 3rd century, a cataclysm that nearly extinguished the Roman state. The army, now the sole source of imperial power, became a law unto itself. This was the age of the barracks emperors. Generals seized the throne, ruled briefly, often only months, and were routinely assassinated by the very troops who had elevated them. In less than 50 years, at least 26 men claimed the title of emperor. Civil wars consumed resources, shattered infrastructure, and, most critically, distracted the legions from the frontiers. The enemies pounced. Along the Danube and Rhine, the Goths and Alemanni broke through in massive, coordinated raids. In the east, the aggressive Sassanid Persian Empire humiliated Rome, eventually capturing and perhaps executing the Emperor Valerian in 260 CE. Economic disaster mirrored the political chaos. To finance their endless civil wars, emperors continually devalued the coinage, reducing the silver content of the denarius to almost zero. This caused crippling hyperinflation. Trade collapsed, markets reverted to inefficient barter systems, and the empire, unable to pay its armies or collect reliable taxes, functionally broke into 3 separate, independent kingdoms by the 260s CE. Chapter 13. Diocletian and the Iron Hand. Narrator. The empire was salvaged from total ruin by the iron-willed soldier, Diocletian, r. 284 to 305 CE. Recognizing that one man could no longer govern the vast, fractured state, he implemented radical, totalitarian reforms. First, he ended the pretense of the Principate. He declared himself Dominus et Deus, Lord and God, establishing the Dominate, a complete and centralized autocracy. He reorganized the provinces and doubled the size of the civil bureaucracy and the army. Second, he formalized the division of the empire with the tetrarchy, the rule of four. He split the empire into east and west, each ruled by an Augustus, who governed with the aid of a junior Caesar. This ensured that imperial power was geographically distributed and theoretically provided a clear succession plan. While it stabilized the frontiers and restored order, it cemented the political precedent that the two halves of the empire were separate entities. Diocletian also attempted to solve the economic crisis with the Edict on Maximum Prices, setting mandatory ceilings on over 1,000 goods and wages. This draconian measure failed utterly, merely driving goods onto the black market. By enforcing state control over occupations, making certain jobs hereditary, he further froze the social and economic mobility that had been Rome's past strength. Constantine, Christianity, and the New Rome. The Tetrarchy collapsed into civil war shortly after Diocletian's abdication. Victory ultimately belonged to Constantine the Great, r. 306 to 337 CE, who claimed the throne after defeating his rival Maxentius at the Battle of the Milvian Bridge in 312 CE. Constantine's reign marked two of the most critical shifts in Roman history. The first was the embrace of Christianity. Attributing his victory at the Milvian Bridge to the Christian God, Constantine issued the Edict of Milan in 313 CE, legalizing the faith. By integrating the highly organized, networked Christian church into the state structure, he sought a new, unifying ideological glue for the fractured empire. Later in the century, under Theodosius, Christianity would become the official state religion, replacing the old Roman gods. The second shift was geographic. Recognizing the West was poor, exposed, and exhausted, Constantine saw the strategic wealth and defensibility of the East. In 330 CE, he founded a massive new capital on the site of the ancient Greek city of Byzantium. He called it Nova Roma, the New Rome. We call it Constantinople. This move did not save the West, but it guaranteed the survival of the East. It relegated the Western Empire, with its weak economy and turbulent frontiers, to a secondary role, setting the stage for its eventual collapse. The floodgates open, Adrianople and the Visigoths. By the late 4th century, the pressure on the borders became overwhelming, driven by an external cataclysm, the arrival of the Huns from Central Asia. The brutal, effective Hunnish cavalry pushed the Germanic tribes, notably the Visigoths, out of their homelands and into Roman territory. Desperate for refuge, the Visigoths begged the Emperor Valens to be allowed to settle within the empire's borders. Valens agreed, demanding tribute and military service, but his local commanders exploited and abused the starving Goths. The resulting rebellion culminated in the Battle of Adrianople in 378 CE. The Visigoths, led by Fritigern, annihilated the Roman army and killed the Eastern Emperor Valens himself. It was a military disaster worse than canny. The lesson was brutal. The legions were no longer invincible. Rome was forced to abandon its policy of integration and adopt a humiliating strategy of accommodation. The Goths were settled as independent nations, foederati, within the empire, governed by their own kings, further eroding the authority of the central Roman state. The fatal economic blow and the final whimper. The final blows to the Western Empire were more economic than military. In 410 CE, the Visigoths under King Alaric, frustrated with Roman duplicity, marched on Italy and did the unthinkable. They sacked the city of Rome. For 3 days, Alaric's men plundered the ancient capital, an event that sent shockwaves across the entire classical world. Saint Augustine, witnessing the spiritual crisis, wrote the City of God in response to the collapse. Yet, the ultimate death blow came not from the Goths, but from the Vandals. In the 430s, the Vandals crossed into North Africa and seized the provinces that served as the breadbasket of the Western Empire. This loss was catastrophic. It cut off the primary source of grain, oil, and, most crucially, tax revenue that funded the Western Roman armies. The subsequent raids, including the second sack of Rome by the Vandals in 455 CE, were symptoms of a financially starved state that could no longer afford to pay its own troops. The Western Empire rapidly devolved into a patchwork of Germanic kingdoms. The end was an anticlimax. By the 470s, the Western Emperor ruled little more than the city of Rome and its surrounding countryside. In 476 CE, The Germanic chieftain Odoacer deposed the last Western Roman emperor, the child ruler Romulus Augustulus. Odoacer did not claim the title for himself. Instead, he sent the imperial regalia, the crown and purple cloak, to the emperor in Constantinople. The Western Roman Empire, officially, simply ceased to exist. It did not fall with a crash, but dissolved in a gradual, quiet transition of power. Imperium Aeternum, the eternal legacy, survival and the Roman idea. The survival of Byzantium. While the Western Empire died in 476 CE, the story of Rome was only half over. The eastern half, anchored by the impregnable walls and wealth of Constantinople, survived and thrived. The Eastern Roman Empire, known to historians as the Byzantine Empire, continued the Roman tradition for another 1,000 years. They were Romans. They spoke Greek, but they used Roman law, preserved Roman administration, and governed their territory with the same centralized authority as Augustus. The high point of Byzantine power came under Emperor Justinian I, r. 527 to 565 CE. Driven by the dream of recovering the West, his brilliant general, Belisarius, briefly reconquered Italy and North Africa. Justinian's most enduring legacy, however, was not military, but legal. He commissioned the creation of the Corpus Juris Civilis, the body of civil law. This massive, systematic collection and codification of all Roman law, going back to the 12 Tables, became the final, comprehensive expression of Roman legal genius. It was preserved and later rediscovered in the West, becoming the foundational basis for virtually all modern civil legal systems in continental Europe. The Byzantine Empire served as a massive cultural and military shield, preserving classical learning and holding back foreign invaders until its final fall to the Ottoman Turks in 1453 CE. Chapter 18. The Enduring Pillars of the West. The empire was gone, but the Roman blueprint for civilization endured, becoming the raw material from which medieval and Renaissance Europe would be constructed. The pillar of law. Concepts like the presumption of innocence, the necessity of evidence, and the right to a fair trial, all rooted in Roman law, were absorbed into the legal traditions of the rising European nations. The idea that a universal, impartial law could govern society is Rome's ultimate gift. The pillar of language and culture. Latin may have died as a spoken language, but it evolved into the Romance languages, French, Spanish, Italian, Portuguese, and Romanian. Furthermore, it remained the lingua franca of scholarship, science, and the Western Church for over 1,000 years, ensuring that Roman thought was constantly accessible. The pillar of administration. When the political structures of the West crumbled, the Christian Church adopted the Roman framework. Bishops governed dioceses that mirrored the old imperial administrative provinces, and the unified Roman Catholic Church provided the only cohesive, centralized, and literate organization in the post-Roman West, effectively inheriting the mantle of authority. The pillar of engineering. The techniques of road building, arch construction, and concrete mixture were lost in the West for centuries, but their monumental remains, the aqueducts, the Colosseum, the Pantheon, served as constant, awe-inspiring reminders of what civilization could achieve, inspiring the architects of the Renaissance. Final reflection. The rise and fall of the Roman Empire is not a tragedy of external force, but a cautionary tale of internal failure. It was the collapse of political virtue, the corruption of economic stability through greed and debt, and the fatal decision to place personal loyalty above the rule of law. The Romans conquered the world with their discipline, their innovation, and their unique ability to absorb and assimilate others. They fell because they could not conquer themselves. They left us with a legacy that is not merely history, but the foundation upon which our own world is built. We stand on Roman stones, speak through Roman concepts, and govern ourselves with Roman laws. The imperium faded, but the Roman idea, the relentless pursuit of order, the belief in the supremacy of the citizen, and the promise of a civilization built to last, remains eternal. We are all, in some way, citizens of Rome.